Would you bow with me, please? It's me, O Lord, standing in the need of prayer. Father, I ask that you will pour out your Spirit, that the words that I may say today will be of blessing. Father, may you prick and convict my heart that what I say may be applied to me. And Father, as we hear these words, may we hear these words and apply them to ourselves so that you, Father, may be glorified in us, that we may glorify you, and that you might make us more and more like your Son. In Jesus' name, amen. We have talked about what it means to be with Jesus. And now we're going to ask, what does it mean to be like Jesus? And it must be what the Lord wants, because in Luke 6 and verse 40, the text says that a student or a disciple is not above his rabbi, but when he is fully trained, he will be like his rabbi. This must be a discussion about the formation of our souls, a deep spiritual growth that allows us not just to be with the one we love, but to become like the one that we love. We see this throughout the New Testament, that God intends for us to be like him. What about Romans 8 and verse 29? For those whom God foreknew, he predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son. Now, this is a statement saying that from eternity past, God's planned intention was that his people, and if you are a Christian, you are his people, would be conformed to the very image of his Son. If that was God's plan from the beginning, he always intended for us to be. It's also the case that God is practicing God's allowing us to practice the presence of God in the present. Look at, for example, the way that Phillips translates Romans 8 and verse 29. God in his foreknowledge chose them to bear the family likeness of his Son. How long shall we be praying for God to be at work in our lives? How long should we be begging for God to be at work in our lives? How long will he be at work in our lives? Galatians 4 and verse 19, until Christ's life becomes visible in your life. In 2 Corinthians chapter 3, Paul is trying to make the point that even today, in his own day, when the law of Moses is being read, people will listen to the story. They'll listen to the powerful word of God, but it's as if there's a veil that lies over their heart. And there's a difference between those who just hear a word about God and those who are being formed by God. And the difference is laid out this way. We Christians have no veil over our faces. We can be mirrors that brightly reflect the glory of the Lord, and as the Spirit of the Lord works within us, we become more like him, if we're called to be conformed to his image, you can see right there in the word that we're called to be formed. We're called to formation. How's that work? I wonder how many of you remember in school learning about the rock cycle. Oh, I wanted to polish rocks. I thought that was the coolest thing, a Christmas gift at 8 years old, to learn how to polish rocks. Nobody tells you, they don't tell you in the advertisement, that first of all, it makes the most terrible noise. And it's supposed to go all the time, this little thing churning with the rock and whatever's in there, and it's supposed to go all night, and it's extremely noisy, keep you awake, and it didn't actually work very well. But wait till you find out how a rock is formed in the first place. They're formed slowly over time. You have weather, you have erosion, you have deposition, you have compaction, you have cementation, you have cooling of the magma and the lava. Think about sedimentary rocks, for example. They're formed from layers of sediment that build up and then are compacted and cemented together, and it takes so long. And so you look at a very, very hard rock, and you say to yourself, there must have been lots and lots of time and pressure to create something that hard. And so it is with our lives. One of my favorite cartoons is Beauty and the Beast. Do you remember that the beast was forced to be a beast? Well, the truth is he was forced to have to look like a beast. The curse was that he would look like the beast. But behaving like one came through several conditions. You had years of alienation, years of people thinking differently about him, years of hopes dashed, years of love lost, and self-talk over and over again that said, I must be how I look. The purpose of the fairy tale is to tell you that what you spend your time focusing on, what you tell yourself, what conditions you find yourself in, have a huge effect on who you become. And this morning, I want us to take a look at how we become the people that we are. First of all, we desire far more than we think. We are lovers first, thinkers second. We tend to overestimate our thinking and underestimate our desiring. We tend to tell ourselves that if we can just learn the right answer, then we'll do the right thing. If I just have the right words, I can fix any situation. We overestimate our thinking and underestimate our desiring. Have you ever noticed that we live in a culture in which everyone wants to do their own thing? A friend of mine I went to college with wrote a song, and the song said, I want to be different, just like everyone else. Everyone wants to do it my way. Don't tell me how to be. I want to do it my own way. And when everyone does it their own way, they end up looking exactly the same. And why is that? The cultural zeitgeist that says you do you has a subtitle that we don't read very carefully. The subtitle is, and I, your cultural influence, will tell you what you means. There really is no such thing as individualism. We are formed by our communities. When you change your mind, for the most part, when you change your mind, it's not so much you changing your mind as it is you choosing a new set of people, beliefs, and values to associate with. In other words, I quit thinking like these people, and now I'm thinking like these people. We are shaped and formed by our cultural influences, by our surroundings, by our communities. And sin is so ordinary. Sin is so banal. And that might explain why when we let our culture that knows not Christ shape us into who we are, we end up looking just like every ordinary thing that knows nothing better than whatever the next thing I can see in front of me is. There's no long-term plan in a world that had no planning. And there is no good future in a world that has no purpose. What we want, what we desire, what we long for shapes us far, far more than what we think we're supposed to want. It turns out that we are formed by our desires. Spiritual formation sounds like a Christian thing. That sounds like something you're supposed to talk about at church. Can I remind you, spiritual formation is not a Christian thing, it's a human thing. Every single human being has within themselves a spirit. And every spirit is being formed. You are being formed every minute of every day. Everybody is. Mother Teresa went through spiritual formation. So did Hitler. Our spirits are being formed, and they're either being malformed or they're being conformed to something better. The proof's in the pudding. How do we know that we, every single human being, is being spiritually shaped in some way, little by little, over time, through their influences, by their culture, to create the kind of person they become? Well, I'll show you how. Take the average 20-year-old. The average 20-year-old is average. But now think of the people you know who are in their 80s. Run through their names. I saw this first in a book by Comer, but I've seen it other places too. My guess is that if you can think of people you know in their 80s, you may be thinking of people who are either the best people you know or the worst people you know. When you try to think of the very best examples in your life, you're probably thinking of people who have reached the crown of their life. And if you're thinking of people who every time you hear the phrase, "get off my lawn," this is the face that comes to your mind. It's because you have 80 years of spiritual formation. What happens to us at the end of our life is, if it's not because of disease or dementia or terrible pain that we all have to experience in life, in the normal routine, what happens near the end of our life is we reflect the formation of our life. Peter Scazzaro, who writes books on how to do leadership or management or how to grow in the next phase of your life, says, I promise you that the best decade of your life can be your 70s. And the second best decade of your life can be your 80s. And the third best decade of your life should be your 60s. That's hopeful. That's hopeful for those of us who every year we grow, we find out that the year 80 doesn't sound that far away. But can I tell you, you will become whatever you sow toward. We all want to be originals. We all want to be different. We all want to be better. The question is, what are we aiming towards? If it's true that we desire more than we think, and it's true that we're formed by our desires, the next thing is that we are and we become what we love. The heart is the deepest seat of our loves. So real transformation is going to come not from changing the things I do first. It'll come from changing the things I want. You are what you love, but you might not love what you think. We're learning to love in all kinds of unconscious ways. If I asked you, what do you love? You might think you know the answer to that question. You might want to shout the answer real quick. But what if we peeled back the curtain and we examined your daily habits? What you spend your money, your time, your focus, your attention on is what you value. Where you spend your money, your focus, your attention, your time is what you love. How do people become materialist consumers? It's not that somebody came to them one day and made an argument and convinced them that it would be a good idea to be a hoarding materialist consumer. What happened is over time, a person becomes immersed in the rhythms and the rituals that train our heart to love a certain picture of the good life, the mall version of life. What the marketers do 2 o'clock in the morning on that channel that tells you you just have to have a knife that can cut through a shoe. It's that kind of thing. It's the feeling that I need to have things, and things will come with glam and glitz and joy. And if I have more things, I'll have more joy. And if I have more stuff, I'll have a greater sense of presence. And over time, all those ideas begin to seep in. And before you realize it, you look around at your house and you think, this could be a warehouse. I never thought that believing stuff can make me happy has become the ruling principle of my life. If you want to decide what kind of person you want to be, if you want to change who you are, we have to change what we love. A lawyer friend of mine was working his way up in a really great business. This is not a sermon against being a lawyer, although it's hard to find a good one in the New Testament. When Jesus says, I ruined myself with a joke and I felt very nervous with any lawyers in the room. When my friend was a lawyer and he was working his way up in his law firm, he found that if he would just spend more time at the office, if he would add one more case, if he would push one more point, if he could squeeze one more dollar out of the people they're fighting against, he could rise in the ranks. And he was rising and rising and rising and quit. And when I asked him why he quit, I love this line. He said, I saw what I was becoming. There's a passage in Colossians in which Paul says that we think that we have the rules. If we can get the ideas in our head, don't touch this, don't taste that, don't handle this, then somehow you'll become a better person. The problem is, knowing the rules has no power over changing what you want. Let me say that again. Knowing the rules has no power over changing what you want. So what we need is something that will calibrate the heart. The good news is that you and I can choose whether we're going to be formed into the image of our culture, formed into the image of our parents or grandparents, formed into the image of the worst of our instincts, or if we're going to be formed into the likeness of His Son. There's a sense in which transformation is passive. You realize that you can't self-save. You can't self-save. The way in which we give our lives to Christ is a movement of surrender. There's a passive sense to it. We let God transform us, but there's an active sense to it in which we let God work within us. You remember that passage in James where James says, I want you to receive the engrafted word. I look up the word engrafted, wasn't sure what that meant. Look at another translation. Receive the implanted word. Well, now, I've been to the dentist and I know what an implant is. It'd be a weird thing, I think, if after receiving an implant, that is, I was able to get an implant. If the dentist said, I've given you an implant, now I'd like you to receive it, you'd say, I already did. Why do you tell someone to receive something that's already been implanted? The point has got to be, I've placed my word within you, but are you willing to let it work? Another illustration is to have two sponges in my hands. And there's a big aquarium. And on one sponge, I hold it lightly like this with an open hand, and the other, I've got it tightly in my fist with a closed hand. And I put them both in the aquarium in the water. I say, okay, which one's in the water? Well, they're both in the water. But which one's full of water? You know which one. The one that receives. The one that receives the overwhelming flood. We can choose to be formed into His likeness. In Galatians chapter 5, in verse 22, we all know the passage. We all know that after being told about the fruit of the Spirit, Paul says, before he gets to the fruit of the Spirit, he says there's the fruit, works of the flesh that are obvious. But then he says that we've crucified those things with the old self. And I love the way that Philip's translation puts it, in which he says, we've crucified the old self and everything that it loved. Instead, we're putting on a new heart. And that leads to the last point this morning, that the process of changing what we love is slow. Oh, we like things fast. We just want to swipe our thumb, and we want to swipe things away that we don't like and swipe things in that we do like, your way, right away. But this is slow. This is the formation that happens throughout all of life. This is the rock cycle. What happens when we try to short circuit the system? Well, we'll say things. We'll make bumper stickers. And we'll say things like, Christians aren't perfect, just forgiven. Can I tell you something? Christians aren't perfect. Christians are forgiven. It's the word just that bothers me. Because I believe in forgiveness. I believe in God's forgiveness. I believe in God's transformation. And I believe what He did on the cross is something I could never do. But what I was saved from is a different question than what I was saved for. And if we believe that God's Spirit has been placed within us and that He is working, we've got to believe in the process called sanctification. And that is, God is trying to change our hearts. Christians aren't perfect. They're forgiven, and they are being made perfect in the likeness of Christ as we let Him. It is no good for Christians who have been Christians for years to say to themselves or to others that those things that I was supposed to put behind me, or those struggles that I've had all of my life, have gotten no better. For it implies that there has been no growth. Sanctification is God at work in our lives. And that's why habits are so very important for this. We only get out of the ruts when our habits become better. Children love tradition. Oh, they won't say that word. But you just try not putting out the basket on Easter, and you'll find out that children love tradition. Youth ministry is a great place to see this. We do a great job of it here, the Mobleys. Youth ministry isn't just entertaining to keep people in the building and then giving them a bunch of moral rules. I believe youth are not seeking to be liberated from ritual. Youth are seeking for liberating rituals. And you and I, in our heart of hearts, when we realize it, know that we're not seeking to be liberated from right actions. We're seeking for liberating right actions. We want to know those things that if we put them into practice, will make our lives better. But it takes time. How does something become second nature? Well, it means we have to commit to regimens. It means that we've got to try new ways of being in the world. It means inviting the gospel story into our lives and being invited into the story over and over again until it gets woven into the fabric of our character and then bubbles up and becomes part of who we are. I want to bring this home. It is possible to sow to the flesh and reap the flesh, or to sow to the Spirit and reap the Spirit. But what does that look like? We all know why lost people are lost. It doesn't seem to be a mind-boggling thing. When Lot and Abraham, there's stories in Genesis. When Lot is introduced to us, we find out that Lot has chosen this area of land that looks over the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. And the text says in Genesis that every night Lot pitched his tent towards Sodom. I want you to think about that. That means that when he would wake up in the morning, when he would go to bed at night, what he was looking at was the city of Sodom. It's not a surprise that the next time you hear about Lot, guess where he's living? He moved into the city that he was focused on every morning and every night. It's not a surprise why the lost are lost. But we wonder sometimes if those who consider themselves the saved consider where we pitch our tent. It's the older brother in the story of the prodigal son that worries me the most. It's the one who says, I've never left. I've always done everything you've asked for. But his heart was as hard as a rock. And that didn't happen overnight. Somehow, working in the kingdom, he developed a heart that was so heartless for his brother. It's the Pharisees who knew the law backwards and forwards, whose hearts were so hard that Jesus says, you are paying attention to the smallest details and you forget the weightier matters. That doesn't happen overnight. It happened through years and years of being told and being taught. If I can point out all the spelling errors in the bulletin, if I can tell my Bible teacher everything I don't like about him, that'll make me spiritual. Instead of realizing the fruit test. Am I more loving and joyful and peaceful and patient, kinder, good, more so than before? The story of Beauty and the Beast is a story of someone who becomes a beast. And then what happens? By welcoming in new impulses, new impressions, a new culture, he begins to see a different way of living that has a profound effect upon him as he's drawn by love. What I find in the New Testament is Christ doesn't come and say, I'm going to give you a whole new set of rules, and if you follow this new set of rules, you'll be a better person. What he says is, I'm going to move inside you. And as you let me in, I will open up areas of your life you didn't even know existed, and I will work on the blockages of your heart. In the 1940s, William Temple said, you can't hand me a sonnet by Shakespeare and say, be Shakespeare. I can't do it. And you can't hand me a Bible that shows me who Christ is and say, be like Christ. I can't do it. But if the spirit of Shakespeare was to move within me, the words of Shakespeare would begin to flow through my hand. And if the Spirit of Christ moves within us, then the story of Christ can begin to show itself through us. And there is no greater phrase than when someone looks at you and says, you remind me of Jesus. Thank you for joining us. I hope you've been encouraged. I hope you've been enriched. And if you have any questions, any thoughts, any comments, reach out to us at prayers@wschurch.net. God bless you. Tune in next week.